Thanks for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast. If you like what you hear today, be sure to share it, review it, like it, tell everyone you know about it, tell people you don't know about it. Also, be sure to follow on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok for regular updates about upcoming guests. Today, we're brought to you by Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee. Be sure to check out their state-of-the-art dealership next to BJ's in Big Y on Memorial Drive, or check out metrojeep.com and make it Metro. And then drive home in your new Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram today.
It's Baxie's Musical Podcast. Resistance is useless.
As you probably know, yes, this is a music podcast. A podcast where I talk about music with people who make music, produce music, and even some people whose job it is to promote and sell music. But I've also spoken to a few people who don't. In some cases, I've spoken to authors, photographers, and graphic artists. I've spoken to people who've created album covers, and even a few people who don't just express their creativity through music alone. I've also spoken to a few people whose desire to express themselves creatively expands to both beyond music and visual arts. In nearly every case, what they create is a form of artistic expression. But that opens the door to start asking a lot of questions, like, is that stuff really art? And if so, why? And if not, why not? The truth is, art can be pretty challenging to define, and sometimes it can be even harder to explain why it's necessary. Here's why I'm bringing it up. Last year, Dutch writer and visual artist Bette Adriaanse, who is also known as Bette A, released a collaboration with legendary music producer Brian Eno on a book called What Art Does: An Unfinished Theory. It was a fascinating look at how over the ages, each culture of the earth has independently gravitated towards their own expressions of art, whether it be through collective creativity or individual expression. The book doesn't just look at how, but more importantly, why and how come art is necessary. These are pretty broad philosophical questions, but Bette and Eno managed to break it down in a very accessible and very meaningful way, a way that was praised by critics internationally. This year, Bette and Brian are about to release a second collaboration. This time, it's a project composed of 2 short stories written by Bette A and combined with a musical companion composed by Brian Eno. The name of the project is called Slow Stories, and it's set to be released on March 3rd. Slow Stories is also being released in a limited edition collector's package that also includes a series of original handmade paintings. These are stories that have been germinating for the last 20 years, but at the encouragement of Brian Eno, the stories have been completed and set to an original score of Eno's legendary ambient music. Bette has been celebrated with several international awards for literature, and Brian Eno's career has taken him from playing and or producing Roxy Music, David Bowie, Talking Heads, U2, Sinead O'Connor, Peter Gabriel, and many others. It's a really interesting collaboration between 2 incredibly creative forces who have been able to profoundly combine their talents to create an immersive multimedia experience. To talk about all of that is my guest today, Bette A, on Baxie's Musical Podcast. So I want to start off by telling you that I've been listening to Slow Stories over the last couple of days, and we'll get to talk about that in just a moment. But I've also been simultaneously reading the book What Art Does: An Unfinished Theory, which is the first collaboration between yourself and Brian Eno. And as I'm reading it, I'm finding myself, giving real consideration to questions that are very, very hard to answer, not just because of what art is, but what the function of it is. And I'm intrigued by the way you've been able to articulate it in such an accessible way, because, these are questions that have been mystifying people for generations. Tell me about writing that book.
Well, first of all, thank you. That's a great compliment for me when you say that you found it a simple and accessible way to talk about something so difficult, because that's exactly what we set out to do. And a lot of the work that went into the book was actually making it simpler and shorter. So we started out with a much longer version, and a lot of work went into make it shorter and simpler. And how it came about is Brian has been lecturing about this topic for decades. It has been bothering him for a really long time that
Sure.
artists haven't said a lot of sensible things about what is art for? What does it do? Why do we do it? And when we face funding cuts and we don't have a good argument for art and why we need it, it's very hard to argue against funding cuts and getting rid of art in education, for instance. So that was his motivation. When I met him, he already had those decades of lecturing about it behind him. And he had been thinking about making a book. I had been thinking about the same questions. I loved his ideas. I thought they were very well thought through, so much better than those complicated philosophers that I had been reading, trying to get to answers. So we just started having phone calls about it. And I'd been typing out our conversations. And that was the beginning of turning it into a book.
Yeah. One does not just, bump into Brian Eno at the grocery store. How did you, how did you even get to be connected to him? How did that even happen?
Well, we were at a dinner for artists and scientists, and I think Brian and I were the only artists there. And the scientists were talking about really interesting things like, will will alien life be carbon based or silicon based, or what happened before the Big Bang? And Brian and I were talking about art, and we realized that we were interested in the same questions. So we were sitting side by side at this dinner, and the way I got talking to him was because I'd forgotten to mention that I don't eat meat, and I was very stressed about it because I don't do so well in these fancy settings. So I thought, oh, I made a horrible mistake. I didn't tell them that I don't eat meat, and now I'm gonna have to eat a giant steak to be polite. And I told Brian, and then I got a vegetarian meal, and Brian didn't get any meal. And at that point, it didn't compute yet what had happened. And I said, aren't you a little bit famous? Why do they forget to give you your meal? I thought that was the one benefit of being a little bit famous, that people don't forget you, you
Right.
know? And he said, yeah, it still happens. And that's how we got to talking, this not so elegant introduction of mine. And much later, years later, I was telling the story to somebody and I thought, Brian gave me his meal. That's why I got a vegetarian meal, because Brian gave me his, and that's why
Wow.
he didn't get one. And I asked him, I said, did you give me your meal that day? And he said, yes. So, which is
Well,
very typical of him, that he wouldn't mention it at all. He will just pretend like, oh no, I didn't get a meal. It's so
it
strange.
was very generous of him.
Yeah, he's very kind.
Yeah. The interesting part about that book is, I mean, you talk about like the cultural necessity of art now, like, independently of each other, cultures all over the world, use art as a way of understanding the world and understanding, their feelings, and regardless of what medium they're using to create art, painting or music or sculpture, or literature, whatever it is, it's part of our inherent DNA. Even if we don't really fully understand those parts of ourselves that connect to art, in having those conversations with a guy like Brian, what did you learn? Were there any revelations for you in those discussions?
There was a confirmation for me, because I always felt that this distinction between art, with a capital A, and creative stuff,
Mm,
books that Kafka wrote would be art with a capital A. And then my grandma knitting a pillow, that would just be creative stuff. And even in art school, you are often taught that there's this big distinction between this mystical, incredible, complicated thing called art and the doodles that you make or painting your nails. And I always felt that that was wrong, incorrect, because I do those things with exactly the same feeling. I pick out an outfit to go to a party with the same feeling that I pick out paint to make a painting. So Brian's thinking confirmed this,
yeah.
that we can call all of this art. And actually, this distinction between high and low art has done more damage than it has done good, and it's excluded people from art. And I like that I now have a way of talking about this and addressing this and making this right. Because one of the greatest responses that I have had on the book was people saying, I thought I didn't do art, but I do a lot of art. I always make the soundtrack when we have a long drive in the car. I always make the playlist, and I like to set the table, and I organize the garden in a aesthetically pleasing way. So people realizing, hey, I have been doing art all the time. I shouldn't be excluded from this conversation. That was a revelation for me.
I thought it was a really interesting part of the book as I'm reading it, because there's a like you say, there's a suggestion that, we all make art, whether or not we believe we're actually doing, or whether or not we see it that way, which, makes you wonder, well, then what is art? Is it art because I said it is, or is it art because of the way you read meaning into it? Or is it somewhere in between, or both?
That's a really good question. And when we started defining art, I was very aware of the dangers, because as soon as you tell an artist, art is this and it's not that, they will immediately take it upon themselves to make something that challenges this definition. So they will put a toilet in the museum, for instance, and say, this is art. That's just part of what artists do, is challenge any definition of art that you come up with. But what we say is art is a way of making feelings happen. So we say in life, a lot of things are determined by feelings. We like to think that we are very rational beings and we think about things and then we make decisions. But actually, a lot of the big things in life, for instance, who you decide to marry, what kind of area you would prefer to live in, whether you like your colleagues or not, those things have to do with feelings. And art is how we navigate our feelings, investigate our feelings, communicate about our feelings, how we make monuments for our feelings, how we try to forget our feelings. So art has to do with that area of life that is our feelings.
So I guess that now, brings me to slow stories, because I have, a lot of questions about, how, like many forms of art, the composition of it is really interesting. And the backstory behind it, I think, is really fascinating. These are two short stories that you have been working on and off for the last 20 years. And both stories have gone through significant changes over the years. Tell me a little bit about what took so long in that process. I mean, were these things that you just felt like, I'll finish these one day, or were they just stories that you felt were incomplete? How would you explain the 20-year germination of these stories?
Yes, good question. The more people in my surroundings ask me that, why does it take so long? And and I think I'm trying to see it as a positive thing now, that I have a very slow brain in that sense. I work on things a very long time, and I do a lot of projects alongside each other, so that one that I do have things blooming and finishing from time to time. But I usually like to take a long time, so things are the way that I feel that they are good. So with these stories, um, I wrote them thinking they might never get published. It's quite hard to get short stories published. And when I started writing them, I didn't even have a novel published yet. And some of these stories are fables, which is even less popular. So I didn't think about publishing. And when I wrote them, sometimes I performed them and then I lost them again. And then I had to rewrite them from memory. And in this process, some things that I thought were important disappeared. And some details that I thought were insignificant became bigger and bigger. So the stories kind of mutated, and I like that, because I like that it went beyond my opinions and my idea of what a story should be or what it should be about, to something more meaningful, and something more dreamlike. So I just let it mutate, and at some point it stopped mutating, and then it was done.
So how does Brian get involved in slow stories? I mean, was this something that you had thought of, ahead of time? Like, I want it to be these two stories to create something, and Brian was a part of it. How did he come into this?
Well, we were working on something else. I don't remember what. I think because we like to collaborate. So at some point, I think we were painting clothes for no real reason. We were painting clothes, painting on clothes, and then we were getting something to eat. And I said, my story collection is coming out, and Brian likes my stories. And I said, my publisher sometimes makes records with music to the stories, and I think I might do it. And he said, well, let's start, let's do it. So we went back to the studio. He put me on a chair, found the right microphone, and said, "Okay, go ahead, read." And it turns out that for a long time he'd had this idea about slow books and slow stories. I think partly with an annoyance, with being annoyed with audiobooks. He wanted stories to be read much more slowly.
Yeah.
So he asked me to read them very, very, very slow. And I didn't really see the point of it in the beginning to go so slow. It was a little bit uncomfortable. But then when he played the music with it, I thought, now I see it. And that's how we began.
Yeah. I think part of the beauty of slow stories is exactly that. I mean, it is slowed down, but at the same time, it's being enhanced. Multi-layered, immersive experience. The experience. I mean, the music, the visuals of it in a very real way. I mean, the entire presentation of the story changes because of all of those things. Even any meaning that you may extract from the stories, because of the way it's presented, I think maybe even changes how people would even interpret them, just because of the mood and the colors in your head that are being created because of these stories. It's really interesting the way you did it.
I love that you say that because that's really what we hoped. And my writing is very pared down. I am the type of writer who just says there was a tree, and I don't say anything about the tree. I don't say that the leaves are red and golden and that they slowly drift to the cold soil of the forest or something. I just say there was a tree. So, and with Brian's music, if you, after the sentence there was a tree, if you then have 20 minutes of Brian's beautiful music, this tree starts to grow in your mind. And this tree will be born from maybe the tree that you saw in your grandma's backyard or the tree that was in the courtyard of your primary school. So that's what I love, that the long spaces of music, they give your mind a chance to imagine detail that is only lightly hinted at in the story.
And I think that's one of the things that I was really impressed by. I think because of the pacing, I could think of the tree, and I could think of the village, and I could think of his, even like the sardine oil. I mean, I could visualize it in my head without all the needless narrative, that because the narrative was there, it just was in silence. And I thought, wow, what a really cool way of creating a story, that the simplicity is the complexity of it. And I thought that was amazing.
I loved it too, and I had the same experience you had because I provided the story, but I only saw it when Brian played the music with it and he started building it. I thought, oh wow, this is great. And the amazing thing about Brian, and I think that's why he's such a good producer, he can look at people at their skills as ingredients, and then he can just compose this incredible thing that is bigger than its parts. So he has an incredible skill and vision to just elevate things to another level and make them magical. So I feel very honored that he did that with my story, and I love the result.
In visual art, graphic art, or whatever, maybe paintings particularly, you hear a lot about the notion of negative space. Yeah, how
Yes.
it's as important as the things that you may see in the background. If certain figures are put in a painting, the things in the space between them are every bit as powerful and meaningful as the figures themselves. And to me, listening to slow stories really kind of does the same thing. The negative space tells the story that is just as important as the ones that are coming out of the speakers with the words you're using. And I thought, I would never have thought to do it that way, but that's how I interpreted what you guys were trying to accomplish. That the negative space here really is as important as the actual storyline itself.
That is exactly it. Last week I was in Brian's studio and there was a poet there who was talking about the blank space. And poets are very comfortable leaving a lot of blank space on the page and letting the blank space do work. And Brian said that's exactly what we're doing with slow stories. Prose writers are very scared of blank space. You hardly ever see a novel with lots of blank space in it. You just think like something went wrong with the printing or something. So he introduced blank space in my story, and my stories allow for it. So that's exactly, you got it just right.
Yeah. Well, good. Although
Yeah.
if someone gives me a 200-page book, I don't mind a few empty pages. To be quite honest, I get to the end a little bit faster that way. But one of the things that I heard, one of the things I heard you talk about in another interview, and I thought this was really interesting because Brian Eno has been making music for 50 plus years or whatever, but his choices and how he picked the music for these stories. You talked about this enormous archive of sounds that he has and how the ambient music was created was almost a layering of like multiple parts. Not so unlike he's done on other records that he's produced, but these compositions individually may be beautiful, but then together they meld even more beautifully. Tell me about observing that process with him, because I mean, it's not everybody thinks, even most producers don't even think that way, but Brian Eno certainly does.
Yes, yeah, he is very inventive. He's always building new software to play around with his archive. And he has this, I don't know how many tracks or minutes are on this archive, but it is a lot. It's tens of thousands of minutes of unused music. And he has one tool in his archive. I think he made it together with Peter Chilvers, where he can randomly shuffle tracks from his archive and layer them on top of each other. And because of the type of music that he makes, which is with this rather quiet, low event music, they can carry that layering. They're still good. So even if you have 3 or 4 tracks stacked on top of each other and played over each other, it sounds great. So we did a couple of shuffles, and tried to find. He labels them with moods and names, and so we used a couple of tag words to find tracks, and then we just layered them. And Brian really had a sense of the type of music that would work with the story. And then we started adding them to the recorded voice that we had,
Yeah.
and just listened how it worked, and then went back to the archive.
Let's talk about the visual part of this. I know, like the cover of the book is a painting that you both painted in, but then there were a lot more. There were quite a few paintings that were done by the two of you, and it's like in the hundreds. Tell me about
Yes.
tell me about that, because that sounds like a pretty daunting project for the both of you.
Well, it's really fun. So we like to work together, we paint together, and Brian has a good system to paint a large amount of paintings, but make them all individual and unique. It's a bit similar to how he makes music. It's a bit generative. So we laid out more than 444 panels. We ended up with 444 panels, but we laid out more so we could mess quite a few up. So we laid them out, we stacked them on top of each other, we stacked items on top of them, even, you know, things like pasta and little shapes. We stacked them on top of each other, and then we spray painted them with colors. And Brian has a system for what kind of colors go first and what kind of colors should go later. And then we removed the stuff that we stacked on top of it. We rearranged them. We looked at it. We used stencils that I made for more spray painting. And slowly an idea emerged of how we could build compositions. So there was a design element where we kept looking at, okay, what is evolving when we put a lot of long, narrow beams on top of the canvases and spray over them, what emerges. And there was a generative element where we let coincidence happen. And slowly, after 2 days, we got towards a composition that we liked. And then we sped it up, and we started doing the final layer. So some of them have eggs on them, and others have like birch forest trees, and it's really a lot of fun. To be honest, it sounds daunting, 444 paintings, but it's so much fun when you do it together and when you have a couple of extra hundred that you can mess up.
Yeah, well, and also it sounds like even at its at its most complicated, these were all done very quickly too. So it wasn't like, it wasn't like you're doing like the Sistine Chapel with every single one of these. These were quick, and then you move on to the next one.
Yes, yes. So we made about every round was about 40, and then each single one got personal attention as well. So, but they're all different because of this generative system that he has, where he shuffles things around, and so. But we did a lot every day, but still the timing was tight because we've done it before on a rectangle, and this time we used a square, and we underestimated the square because the square is much harder to get a good composition on. And that might sound a little abstract to you if you don't paint all the time, but so the square was a challenge. But we got there, and we listened to music while we were doing it, and we just had a lot of fun.
You know, in doing this podcast over the last few years, I'm always, fascinated by, people's creative process and how we all, excuse me, and how we all use creativity throughout our lives. But, there are some people that seem to have a higher connection to their creativity. I mean, both you and Brian, certainly amongst, those people. But describing where it comes from is a mystery even to those people who, create the greatest works of art or the greatest music or whatever it may be. Where do you think that creativity comes from? Where is that being channeled from? Or is it the kind of thing that just simply can't really be understood or articulated?
Well, it is hard to articulate. And I think sometimes as an artist, it's also nice to lean into the mystique a bit. I like to let myself believe that I'm a part of a really mystical process when I'm writing a story, receiving things with a extraterrestrial antenna or something. But all honestly, and also based on the book that we wrote and writing about it, I think it has to do with our feelings. There's underneath our thinking, there is a whole level of feelings going on, and neuroscience also supports this, but I won't try to go into details that I don't fully understand. There's a whole world of feelings inside of us, and they're not all verbalized. They're not all present in our active mind as really clear concepts. So when we have a certain visual in our mind, thinking, I want to paint a pink door. I really want to paint a pink door, but I don't know why, and the door is slightly open. Or in the case of Brian, whose ideas very often have to do with melody, he will have this melody that gives him a good feeling or gives him a sad feeling or a feeling that he'd like to have. So this melody wells up, and it connects to something in him where he thinks, I want to work on that specific melody because that's the feeling that I want to explore today. So, and as you work on it, which is similar to what I said at the beginning about working for 20 years on a story, the thing reveals itself sometimes. The thing reveals, this is actually a really sad song. I don't know why I want to write a sad song right now, but I'm writing an extremely sad song and it feels good. And behind that pink door, there's something very scary, and I want to engage with that scary thing today, because I have feelings that scare me, and through this story, I can explore them a little bit. So that's where I think it comes from, which is not so mystical as I would hope it to be, but I do think that is where it comes from.
So,
What do you think?
well, I mean,
What do you think?
I know for me, I have to discipline myself to, like, if I write something and I try to write something like every day, I almost need the discipline to do it, and I need the space and the quiet to do it. Once I'm in it, then it comes pretty quickly to me. But I know that, for a lot of people, you could look at a computer screen all day or end of paper and, get nowhere with it. So, I sometimes wonder, well, what separates, those who seem to be in touch with their creative abilities and those who do not, or struggle with it, or, have a difficulty, finding what it is that draws it out of them. I mean, do you think there's a discipline to it, or is it something, far more spiritual about it, perhaps?
It probably differs from person to person, but something that I see a lot as an art teacher is that in both my art school students and people who don't do art is that they have some kind of mental barrier to do art. So children, when they are young, they love drawing. Almost without exception, they like to make just lines on the paper. And then there's a stage, I think they call it the rational stage in developmental psychology, where children start to question, what is this for? What is the bike for? Why do I need to ride a bike? What is history class for? What do I need it for? And they want to know the use of things. And in art, it isn't very clear in education what art is for. They just say, you should do it. And children in this stage start putting expectations on their art. So when they make drawings, they would like their drawings to develop to a photorealism stage. And then they declare, if they cannot get to that stage, they declare, I can draw.
Right.
If they sing, they want to be the best singer, because if you are the best singer, you get on a stage and everybody comes to see you and then they clap. If you're not the best singer, you declare, I can sing. So I think a lot of people have barriers like that, where they haven't learned what art is for, and that it's actually for yourself, and that it helps you, and that it's a good thing, and it doesn't need to reach any kind of level in order to fulfill its purpose. And then they stop doing it, and then later in life they think, why did I stop playing the violin, or why did I stop making hip hop?
Right.
And it's because they put these expectations on themselves. And I think that blocks a lot of people. If they make doodles, they think, well, I want it to be different and I can't get there, and they end in frustration. So I always say, do the thing that you like and do a little bit more of it. Don't try to be like some artist out there who you really admire. Do the thing that you already do, like humming in the shower or painting Easter eggs with your kids, and do a little bit more of it. Just paint more eggs.
Yeah.
Paint eggs with Christmas at Christmas as well, or paint other round things, and do a little bit more of it. And then I think most people will find this creativity in themselves, that they feel that they might not have.
I think that's true. And I think that, a lot of people do a very good job of convincing themselves of the things that they cannot do rather than, embrace the things that they do enjoy, because I mean, creativity and joy, kind of, feed off each other, I think. About 50 years ago, Brian collaborated with us on this idea called oblique strategies. And
Yes.
it was a set of cards that were designed to enhance a person's creativity, especially in those moments when, creative juices were not exactly flowing or blocked creatively and
Yeah.
couldn't get past that. How do you get those moments?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm reminded of this moment when I was trying to help Brian with lyrics to a song, and he doesn't really like to write lyrics, so sometimes he asks for my help. I don't know actually if my help is any good, but he doesn't want to do it alone. So we were working on these lyrics, and we were very stuck. And he said, let's take a card. Let's take a card of the oblique strategies, both of us. And he's very serious about the fact that you cannot put the card back. If you don't like the card, you can't put it back. That's your card. That's it. So I got a card and it said, stick to the thing, stick to the idea, or something like that. And so as we continued, I tried to keep sticking to the idea, which had to do with something about people climbing a mountain and something with light or something. So I kept going back to that mountain and the light, and we didn't get anywhere. And then in the end, after so much struggle, we got the lyrics together and we were so happy. And I said, oh, it was such a struggle. It seemed like you were blocking me in every way. What was on your card? So Brian had the opposite. He said he had something like, whatever, abandon your idea or something. So we were working with opposite cards. I had stick to your idea and he had abandon it. So we
And
were
run away.
sabotaging. Yeah. So that sort of worked. I mean, it
Yeah.
did work. And I think I like to have a lot of projects running alongside each other. So
Yeah.
as I said at the beginning, I'm a slow worker. So I already accepted that about myself, that I need time. So if I have a lot of things at the same time with different levels of seriousness, so I paint t-shirts and I paint cups and plates, which has a low level of seriousness. I play music. I do very serious essays about philosophy and culture. So I work on those. I'm always writing stories. I always have something that I can go to that suits my mood. And a great thing that I can really recommend is to have long and short projects. So I have a drawing here in my studio that I work on for 5 minutes every day. And if you do that for 2 years, you get a pretty big drawing. and it's only 5 minutes every day.
Yeah.
So that's really nice. And then I have long work where I work for several hours on something that has to be finished in a shorter time span. So I always encourage people to mix it up
You're
if they tend to get stuck.
you're involved in a couple other projects that I wanted to ask you about. First of all, the first of which was the heroines movement, and then also Turquoise. Tell me a little bit about those two projects that you're involved in.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking about it. And when my first novel came out, I had a great reception uh, in the US. The US has been so kind to me. I did a book tour and it was wonderful. It was great to meet people who loved my book. Um, and I realized, oh, so this is what it is to be an author. You go into bookstores, you talk about your book, and everybody listens and nods. And in the end, you sign their books. And they ask you questions, but I wanted to hear from them. I wanted them to tell me stuff. I wanted that the questions that I pose in the book, I wanted to hear from people. How did they feel about that? How do they feel about urban alienation or what it's like to live in a big city right now? I wanted to hear from them. And I have a lot of scientist friends, and they also said that they missed in their work a kind of social engagement and a kind of impact. So we set up Turquoise, a foundation for artists and scientists to work together on social topics. So we get together, we have conversations, those conversations that I longed for in the bookstore, where you learn from each other. And then we set up projects. And one of the projects is the Heroines Movement, which is a storytelling movement across the world where local teams create books about women role models in their country. So we created a book in the Netherlands, a children's book, with the help of a wonderful writer, Bob Schons, a wonderful illustrator, but also specialists in education and psychology. We made a school program, and children in the Netherlands learned about these stories of women and had an accompanying school program to sort of balance out the unevenness that is in the school program, where you hear a lot about the men in history and a little bit less about the women, because historically women had to, run the house,
Right.
and didn't have the money. So we compensate for that with the books and encourage children to dream big and to chase their dreams. In Nepal, they made a similar book. We have a great team in Nepal who made a beautiful book about Nepali role models, which completely different issues locally that they address that have to do with child marriage and expectations of women that are different in Nepal. And they got the book to 800 schools across Nepal. We teach an online class in poetry and fiction for women in Afghanistan, who they have to join in secret, but that's also part of our foundation. And the Heroines Movement is this amazing school for women in Afghanistan. So I'm very proud of it. And the proceeds of the record and the paintings half of it are going to this charity that I co-founded.
It's amazing, and when I heard that was a part of a part of the component of the book, I thought, well, I need to ask you about that because I mean, it's an amazing idea that you can honor women, all whatever struggles they're dealing with.
Yeah, I'm very glad that you asked about it. Also, because we have a limited edition, which feels uncomfortable to make a limited edition and ask $444 for it, because of Brian and I both are very into open access. But with these things that are for our charities, Brian is raising funds for his climate charity. We love making a really beautiful, special, limited edition because we know the money is going into the projects.
Slow Stories is a beautiful, beautifully conceived project. It was really a joy to listen to it. I really appreciate the conversation today, Bette. This has been really fun, really interesting.
Thank you so much. I loved your questions. I very much enjoyed it, and thank you for listening to our slow stories and reading what art does.
Again, thank you so much for the time. I wish you best of luck with all these projects.
Thank you.
The name of the collaboration between Bette and Brian Eno is called Slow Stories. It's coming out on March 3rd. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you can reach me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks to Metro, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee for their support. But most of all, thanks to you for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.